His power redeems. Jesus is Lord of all. King of kings, Lord of lords. Jesus is Lord of all. All my possessions and all my life, Jesus is Lord of all. Here we are.
Alrighty, beautiful people. It worked out all right last week, so we're going to try it again this week. If you guys will just kind of pass it around and make sure Richard can help us move stuff around. Richard, we're trying to do 2 mics, not you running. We're going to see if we can just kind of pass them along, trust everybody with them. Or that. So they're both on. If we kind of just stick one with one and stick one with the other, we should be good to go. We'll see if it works. It did last week. All righty. Welcome once again to the Wednesday night huddle in our study of Genesis. You are well aware by now the theme is beginnings, and tonight we're in Genesis chapter 40. If I can get somebody to read verses 1 through 4. Genesis chapter 40, verses 1 through 4.
Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his 2 officers and chief cupbearer and the chief baker. And he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them, and they continued for some time in custody.
All right, thank you. What is important, or why are the cupbearer and baker important? What makes them important? I guess I should begin by asking, what is a cupbearer and what is a baker? At least at this point in time.
Well, the cupbearer is the king's taster.
Okay, the king's taster.
And he is the most likely way to assassinate a king in this time is by poisoning. And it's the safest way because it's hard to prove that you poisoned him since they didn't have chemistry in those days to speak of. And so he was one of the most trusted people in the king's kingdom. And the baker was the same way. I mean, people could poison through the baker. And so these are 2 very, very powerful and close people that he's lost trust in.
Because of their proximity, not only do they have to be trusted, it also means that they're fairly important because of their proximity and trustworthiness. It wouldn't be uncommon for them to have people perhaps work underneath them. So not only do they have to be very trustworthy, but they have to be trustworthy hirers as well, because should somebody come in underneath them who's not trustworthy, you get the general idea. I read at least one commentator who postulated that perhaps the offense that takes place here has something to do with food or something that Pharaoh ate, that maybe he got sick because he takes the 2 people responsible for his food and what he ingests and puts both of them in prison. And you remember what we said prison was for last week? By any chance? Prison at this point in time is rarely used as a kind of punishment. Rather, it's a holding idea, a holding cell of, you just hang out here for a minute while I figure out what happened. So it suggests the idea, given that cupbearer and baker both are connected with that which Pharaoh eats and drinks, that he must have had some kind of food poison, must have gotten sick in some way, and decided to put both of them there in prison while he figured out what was going on. The text never tells us, but it's certainly a high probability. There is a repeated designation of an individual, or a repeated title in these first 4 verses. What is that repeated title? Okay, cupbearer and baker both were repeated because they're going to be very important individuals. Anybody else that's repeated, or any other title that's repeated? Captain of the guard. Who is that? The captain of the guard. We actually know who it is. Who is it? Potiphar. Remember how in chapter 39 we picked up on, there's this little note we said at the very beginning. The text seems to go out of its way to develop who he is. The text seems to go out of its way as this is Potiphar. He's the captain of the guard in Pharaoh's army, letting us know how important he is. Why? Well, one, to let us know how important he is, but also probably to set up this. So who's in charge of this prison? Potiphar. And what does Potiphar do for Joseph? The text says the captain of the guard does something. What does he do? Okay, he's going to appoint him over some people, but whom? The captain of the guard is going to do something for Joseph. Said, put him over some people, that's true, but whom? Now, why is that important? So why is it important they're all together? They can start talking, and why will that matter? Okay. Perhaps so there'll be an aspect of know who is conspiring. But from Joseph's perspective, why is that important? Trusted by whom? He is now in the realm with other people who have Pharaoh's ear, maybe individuals who are even trusted more than Potiphar. Because Potiphar's the captain of the guard, needed to be trustworthy, but he doesn't have anything to do with food. So he's in amongst some of the most trustworthy individuals, and it's Potiphar who makes that meeting happen. Now, you and I have the benefit of 20/20 vision, and we know what will take place later. I don't know whether Potiphar had it in his mind that maybe, just maybe, if he was able to talk to these two individuals, that maybe he could get Pharaoh to release him. I don't know if that went through his head. We know that that's what happens. But if nothing else, how mad do you think Pharaoh was, assuming that he got sick from something he ate? Assuming that he arrived at the conclusion that somebody has betrayed him, how mad do you think he was? Okay, mad. I'm not sure the word mad quite does it justice. Angry, mad, incensed, you get the general idea. Enraged. So if Pharaoh was really mad at these two individuals, do you think maybe he would have wanted to keep his eye on them? To our former prison guard, if you had some individuals who you really wanted to keep an eye on, who are you going to put in charge of making sure that they're taken care of?
Whoever's assigned. You looking for somebody special?
I'm looking for, on a range from trustworthy to really untrustworthy.
Your most trustworthy people.
If it's somebody who you want to make sure, maybe because you want to hear if maybe they're going to talk, maybe it's because you want to make sure that they aren't able to escape, whatever the reason might be, you're going to make sure that you put somebody who you really trust.
You could take extra precautions as well.
Okay, take extra precautions. And who's loyal to you. So with all those things in mind, what does that suggest about how Potiphar views Joseph? Because he picks. Potiphar picks who's going to look over and who's going to watch and who's going to take care of the cupbearer and the baker. Sure.
If they were not trusted on some level, would they ever come back into service
Well-
in that position? I would think he would almost take their heads off. I mean, if he can't trust them.
Well, that's the point of why they're both there. And spoiler alert, we're going to find out at the end the answer is yes, because the cupbearer is going to come back. Well, if you can prove who it is, then you know who it wasn't. Or at least that's the general idea. So it's, okay, can I trust this individual? So I'm going to hold him here for a minute to see if I can trust him. I mean, that would be what a wise ruler would do. Of, I don't want to toss out a very loyal individual, but I need to make sure whether they're loyal or not. So clearly the answer must be yes. But what does it suggest about how Potiphar views Joseph? That he, not the warden, but he puts Joseph in charge.
I think it means that he actually believed Joseph's story, not his wife's.
We talked last week about how the text says Joseph was angry, but it never actually says who he was angry at. And if, at least at this point in time, if Potiphar had believed his wife's story that Joseph had tried to seduce her, that he would have just killed Joseph, not tossed him into prison, because prison's not used for punishment. It's used to hold. And not only is he tossed into prison, he's tossed into a royal prison. And Joseph has no standing whatsoever except that he serves in Potiphar's house. Well, this portion of the story seems to add credence to that idea, because Potiphar, he's the one who says, all right, I want Joseph in charge of these guys. So clearly he must trust Joseph still to some level, and probably doesn't fully believe his wife's story. If nothing else, we know Potiphar still trusts Joseph, and that Joseph is still a trustworthy individual. And there's the possibility that in Potiphar's mind, there was the potential that by Joseph rubbing shoulders with people close to Pharaoh, that maybe he could get Joseph released. If nothing else, that's what God will do. But perhaps Potiphar thinks as well. Sure.
He could be the chief conspirator. He could take what he learned from Joseph, from the cupbearer and the baker, to turn against them and report to Pharaoh that, well, they did conspire to do what they were intending to do.
That's true.
I mean, it's far-fetching out there, but he's in that position. He could do that.
He could if he wanted to. Now, I'm not sure who we're conspiring against, but if it's conspiring against Joseph, Potiphar needs no reason to kill Joseph. He can do whatever he wants. That's true. He could bring it up the ladder if he wanted to. Either way, he trusts Joseph. But you're right that it's just his trust of Joseph. It does not necessarily mean he was planning on Joseph being able to be released. That's true. But if nothing else, it indicates his trust of Joseph and further substantiates that Joseph doesn't do what he was accused of. All right, let's continue on in verses 5 through 15.
And one night they both dreamed, the cupbearer, the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in a prison. Each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" They said to him, "We have bad dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." Then Joseph said to him, "This is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit."
All right, thank you. At this point in time, especially in the land of Egypt, dreams are believed to be at least one of the vehicles by which the gods would communicate with humanity. But the problem was the gods didn't give an interpretation. Instead, to get an interpretation of your dream, you then needed to go to a specialist, if you will, who utilized what they called a dream book that contained various symbols and let you know what the symbols meant. And usually this dream book conveyed the remedies that would be necessary, because the dream was warning you about something. And so, okay, you saw this symbol, here's what it means, here's the remedy that you need to ritually do in order to avoid this particular scenario. It's how things usually go. Now, remember I said that the gods were not understood to give interpretations for the dreams. Who does Joseph give credit for dream interpretation to? He gives it to God. So one, it's known that it's not Joseph doing it, but Joseph lets it be known that it's not him, but rather it's God. And it's opposite of what the culture would have expected at that particular point in time.
One of the significant things about biblical prophecy or future telling that impresses me when you look at other so-called false prophets is the specificity of the prophets. You know, it's like one of the, I forget which one, but one of the Roman emperors summoned his soothsayers before one of the great battles of history. And he asked the soothsayer to read the animal's entrails and decide the future of the battle, and the soothsayer declared that the Roman emperor would witness a great battle on the battleground today, but he didn't ask whose victory the Roman emperor would see, and in fact, that the Roman emperor lost his life. I wish I could remember which one it was. But it's kind of like too the astrologers. You know, I see a handsome dark stranger in your future, or I see wealth in your future, or I see prosperity in your future. 3 days. 3 days, you're going to be lifted up. 3 days, you're going to be dead.
No. Joseph is going to mention his master's house. What does he mean, you think? His master's house. Now remember, we already said the idea of the captain of the guard is Potiphar, so he seems to be still referring to Potiphar. And it's unclear whether perhaps this prison is near Potiphar's house, maybe connected to Potiphar's house, or maybe it's just an acknowledgement of who ultimately continues to be in this location, who rules this area, that is Potiphar. And if you had to summarize, because there are going to be two dreams, we've only read one up to this point. If you had to summarize the message of this first dream, how would you summarize it? Okay, a positive, and what would make it positive? Okay, that in 3 days you're going to have favor again with Pharaoh, and you're going to go back to the very place that you were earlier. All right, let's read about the second dream in verses 16 through 22.
When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, I also was in my dream, and there were 3 white baskets on my head. In the uppermost basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, and the birds ate them out of the basket on my head. So Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days Pharaoh will lift off your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh from you. How far am I going? 22?
To the end of the chapter, please.
Okay. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and the chief baker among his servants. Then he restored the chief butler to his butlership again, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him.
All right, thank you. So what's the message of the second dream? Not good. We have not good. You'll be restored, and, well, you're not going to be restored, or you're going to die. 3 days later, after the dreams are interpreted, 3 days later, what happens? Okay, exactly what he said was going to happen happened. And what does that suggest about Joseph? Okay, maybe not, but at least they would have listened perhaps. What does it suggest about Joseph that what he said was going to happen 3 days later does happen? Okay, that he's reliable. Okay, that Pharaoh could perhaps trust him.
It proves that he is speaking on behalf of God through these dreams.
Okay, because at the beginning he says, I can't interpret them, only God can interpret them, but he interprets them correctly, which suggests that he is a conduit of God's interpretation of dreams. With that, okay, that at least it seems as that he's gone on as from a spoiled tattletale to perhaps the spokesman of God. But it leads us to a question. Joseph had dreams. In fact, this entire saga will have 3 sets of dreams. This is the second set. What does Joseph's interpretation, accurate interpretation, suggest about his dreams when he was a kid? What do you think? It suggests that they might. Now, we don't know if they will or not, but it certainly, we, having read it, know that, but if all we knew was up to this point, we wouldn't know yet whether they were going to or not, but it would certainly give credence to, well, maybe he didn't know what he was talking about. Maybe he really was able to interpret those dreams and cause us to go, well, perhaps he's right. That's fair. He does not explicitly state, though the lack of any rebuttal would suggest that that was the interpretation that he went with. But you're right, he doesn't explicitly state one way or the other. But it does cause us to go, is that interpretation, even though it might have just been an assumption, is it right? Because this one was right. What does it suggest about God that 3 days later, what Joseph said was going to happen, happened? That at least one thing it could communicate is that he communicates through Joseph and that is utilizing Joseph. But also let us know that God knows the future. Say that again, I'm sorry. I don't know. How they go about it, I don't know. I'm sure there's some kind of investigation. One would assume there's questioning, but we're never told as to exactly how he goes about it. I'm sure there was more than one way to try and figure it out. But somehow or another, he's able to determine what takes place. And we're making the assumption that somebody, that he got sick from something. And it wasn't just that both of them irritated him. We don't know. For whatever reason, he was upset with both of them, and it's a possible, maybe even probable idea that somebody gets sick. And so he goes, well, there's only 2 people who are responsible for my food and my drink. Got to be one of you guys. But it's unclear. We don't know. What do you think? Does Pharaoh know Joseph's interpretation of these dreams? Why not? Okay, that's my understanding, is Pharaoh knows nothing about Joseph yet. Pharaoh knows nothing about Joseph just yet. Now, he will, but at the moment knows nothing. And so it's not as though Pharaoh goes, oh, well, this guy had a dream, I should trust that dream.
I think verse 23 is for us. Verse 23.
Mm-hmm.
Have we ever been blessed by somebody because they're a Christian?
Hmm.
Thank God for character and because this cupbearer in their history, he forgets it.
And to be clear, what does he forget?
He forgets the prophecies.
Okay, what else does he forget? Because he forgets the prophecies, but he forgets something else too. Well, that's true. Joseph is explicitly asked, and he forgets that. Okay, so maybe there's a third thing.
That it came from God.
Okay, maybe there's a fourth thing. It's from God. There's at least a fourth thing. I'm going for something here. How long are the cupbearer and the baker in jail? who's in charge of them? Okay, what does it mean to be in charge of them, I wonder? Giving them orders. Here's what mine says. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. What does that convey? Attended them. Second? Fed them. So he's watching over them, guarding them, but he also seems to be taking care of their needs within the midst of it. So he forgets the interpretation. He forgets that it's from God. He forgets his promise made to Joseph, and he forgets the guy who took care of him. We don't know how long. But all of that speaks to your point with, does the same ever happen to us? Do we ever do the same? Where somebody does something for us and we end up forgetting them. That's true. That's true. So he just ignores Joseph's request. That's fair. I wonder, is it possible that the more often we are like Christ, the more we serve someone and take care of someone like we're supposed to, I wonder if it's easier or harder to take that individual for granted. My suspicion is that it's easier. I think about Christ. I think about God and what they have done. And yet how easy is it to take for granted what God does? For we only breathe because he allows us to. The rain that we have only comes because he allows it. And yet it's really easy to take him for granted because he is good. Yeah. Yeah. That it seems that at times, the more we try and do good, the easier it is to be taken for granted. And I suspect there is a lesson for us, not only to avoid being the one who takes others for granted, but also to be aware that if we do as God says, if we do serve others, if we do take care of others, the reality is at some point we will be taken for granted. It just seems to be the way the world works. Seems like a good segue to ask this question. What other lessons are we to learn from this particular story of Joseph, or this part of the story of Joseph, you think? Okay, don't do that to other people. All right. What other lessons do we learn from this portion?
I think that we have to understand and learn that it may be many, many years before God answers a prayer. I mean, Joseph, even though he mentioned that to the baker, and he didn't get what he wanted. And so that's a lesson there for me.
It may take time. Now, when we say it may take time, we might want to add a qualifier. Because when we say it may take time, we could easily arrive at the conclusion that means that God does nothing during that point in time. And to be clear, it might seem that way. Because for Joseph, he's going to wait 2 more years. Spoiler alert. We find that out in the first verse of the next chapter. He's going to wait 2 more years. So for him, I'm sure it felt like, well, I've done all these things, and here I am just stuck here. And yet that entire time, God still seems to be working. God still seems to be taking care of him. So he is, in the fact, answering his prayer. It's just the completion of that takes a little while. But we can arrive at the conclusion that we've been ignored that entire time, which may not be right. It may not be true. Because one of the things that we see throughout the story of Joseph is God's providence on behalf of Joseph and how he takes care of Joseph, yet we have the benefit of 20/20 hindsight vision. But for Joseph, it's 13 years from start to finish. That's a really long time. Especially for Joseph keeps doing everything right and still seems to be getting a raw deal. Yet, what we know, but he couldn't know, well, I don't know if that's entirely true, but what we know, and I don't know what he knew of, is we can see how God was using all the raw deal to bring about what needed to take place. I don't know how much Joseph was able to see that at that point in time. Yeah. We see this idea of faithfulness with the idea of providence and God being faithful to Joseph, but it's also clear that Joseph is faithful to God. And it is that faithfulness and that continued faithfulness that ultimately will bring about the result that takes place. That even when it seems like everything's going south, that we're still to be faithful, for we don't know what God might be doing. Anything else? I wonder, what do you think would have happened if Joseph, having done nothing wrong and having been accused by Potiphar's wife, and we don't know what conversations Potiphar had with Joseph, or if he had any, about, well, I've got to do this to save face. We don't know if he had that conversation. He might have just tossed him in jail. I don't know. Neither do you. But how easy would it have been for Joseph to lash out, be angry, or perhaps just sulk in a corner because of what had taken place and how poorly he had been treated? I wonder how easy that would have been for him. What would have happened if he had? Probably nothing positive. Now, to be clear, God can bring all things out and work all things together for however he wants to. Nevertheless, we still bear responsibility for our actions. I wonder, remember who puts Joseph in the same room with the cupbearer and the baker? And how do you think Potiphar would have done the same thing if Joseph had sulked in a corner or lashed out or been suddenly just fallen to pieces and chosen to do nothing? Likely not. It is Joseph's continued faithfulness that perhaps reassures Potiphar. But however it impacts Potiphar, the way Joseph treats Potiphar helps set up the very scenario that will allow him to make it out of prison 2 years later. Consider another individual. How easy do you think it would have been for Joseph, or what do you think would have happened if Joseph, being irritated at being in prison, in comes the cupbearer and the baker, and he treats them poorly? Do you think the cupbearer remembers him? Or what if he doesn't bother with their dreams, because who's got time for that? Do you think that the audience with Pharaoh takes place? In my mind, at least one of the lessons that we learned is we need to be careful how we treat people. There is a pragmatic aspect to this, that you never know who you might end up needing. There's another point we're going to make in just a second. But I'm reminded of Hebrews that talks in terms of some entertained angel without being even aware of it. And the way they treated them ended up mattering. I'm also reminded, remember this entire section talks in turn, or the entire story of Joseph, all about God's providence. Who does God work through to help Joseph here? This entire section is about God's providence. How does God providentially take care of Joseph here? Through Potiphar? And who else? Well, we could debate about that one. Okay. We could say to at least some extent the cupbearer, not entirely yet, but at least to some extent at the moment there, but predominantly Potiphar. It's interesting that with God's providence, it often comes through people. And that it seems that God often works through people. In fact, much of God's will is accomplished through people and alongside people. That just seems to be how he works. Why, I don't know, but that's what he chooses to do. God could have just acted and done certain things, but instead he chooses to work through Potiphar, which leads us back to that same question we just asked a minute ago. What happens if Joseph treats Potiphar poorly? He misses out on how God is providentially working through Potiphar. We never know who God might be working through for us. We never know how God might intend to use someone for us, and if we turn around and treat them very poorly, we may very well miss out on the very thing that God was trying to do, which brings us back to your point of sometimes it seems like God's taking a really long time. And we don't know how long God might take. And he might have worked things together to put somebody in our lives to help grow us, but if we choose to treat them poorly, do we miss out on that? Now, I'm not saying God can't bring it back around. Of course, God can do what he wants, but we still might miss out on that moment. Well, that's true. The question is, who's working through the wife? It could be God. It might not be. Somebody's working through the life. The question is whom? That's true. That's true. The scenario does show his strength. Okay, so we're now at a discussion with regards to trials and the way God utilizes trials. And that to say that God providentially wants the wife to be in a position to try and tempt Joseph, God doesn't tempt anyone. But he does allow us to go through trials and does allow us to go through certain situations and uses those trials just as he will with Joseph to help us grow into who he would have us to be. So there is a sense in which that absolutely takes place. Anything else that we're supposed to learn, you think, from the story of Joseph here? Take it? Okay, the importance of patience, which kind of ties in with what we were talking over here. And patience, what do we mean by patience, I wonder? Okay. Okay. And I wonder, what does patience look like? Because I think you're right, and certainly something that we learn, but I wonder, what does it look like? Yeah. Okay. 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 But sometimes patience might look like calm acceptance, and sometimes it might look like asking questions, but I really don't understand what's going on here. Okay. What does patience look like? Okay. All right. Okay. 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 All right. Staying the course. Anybody else? What does patience look like, you think? Okay. Trust. All right. Anybody else? What does patience look like? Patience looks like a donkey. Patience looks like a donkey. Okay. You care to elaborate?
Okay.
I thought you never asked. Okay. In James chapter 1, he talks about patience, that the trials that you have produce endurance or patience, depending on your translation. And the word is hupomene. It means to bear up under, or to bear up under a load. And it was a word that was used for a donkey because, a horse can run. But if you want something to carry a load, you get a donkey.
Okay.
And the donkey, you can load it down and load it down and load it down, and it just keeps on going. Now, I've never owned a donkey, so I'm just going by what I've been told. So it's the difference, huh? Yeah.
She said, count your blessings.
Yeah, okay. So it's the difference between an Arabian stallion that's good, or let's say a quarter horse that's good for a quarter mile, or for a donkey that can just keep on, keeping on, keeping on.
Okay. Yes, sir. Say stubborn. Okay. I think that's what the message was. Anybody else? What does patience look like? I suspect there's truth in everything that was said, and I'm not sure that there is one picture for every single time. Because I suspect patience looks a little bit different based upon the circumstances. But ultimately, it seems to be the idea of faithfulness and patience seem to go hand in hand. For a lot of times, whenever I think of the idea of patience, I think of sitting in the doctor's office, because I need patience when I sit in the doctor's office, and it runs out really quick. You'd think they'd be faster. I had an appointment. But either way, I digress. And yet, I don't know that that's patience. I don't know that patience is just sitting still, though at times it might be. For God does say, those who wait upon the Lord, there might be a time. But ultimately, it seems to be this idea of faithfulness of, okay, what is the next right thing, which seems to be what Joseph does. Now, the idea of moving forward, I think, is right, except for there are times when it doesn't seem like we can move forward. And we just kind of keep seemingly like a hamster on a wheel going nowhere. And yet it's the attempt to continue to do the right thing, of one foot in front of another, continuing to try and be faithful, that seems to be the idea of patience as we wait. And that seems to be what Joseph does. Whether it be in Potiphar's house and the next right thing, or whether it be the moment he arrives in prison for having done absolutely nothing wrong and everything right, and he chooses to get up the next day and do what he knows is right. And choose to be faithful both to his God and to those who are around him. And that seems to be the idea of patience that we see on behalf of Joseph. And it is that faithfulness and it is that patience that God will reward, albeit sometime later, as he works to the people that are around him. Anybody want the last word? And we're going to wrap up for tonight. All right, let's pray together and we'll be done. Father, Lord, we're so thankful for your Son. Now, Lord, we ask that you help us to wait on you, to be faithful as you are faithful. Lord, we ask you help us to glorify you in all we do. We love and quake to be with you in Christ's name.